Good morning, good morning, everybody. Welcome to Coffee with T, and I'm T, and we are here for our special edition on Mondays of Men Hurt Too. And I am so excited about this edition of Men Hurt Too because we really need to give our men a voice. And we have Pervis Taylor here to share his truth. So Pervis is an award-winning celebrity life coach, speaker, and author of the critically acclaimed book, Survival Mode. It's a book that teaches men how to process their emotions. He is also co-founder of Alchemic Solutions, a program that teaches young men of color how to develop emotional intelligence. He has his master's degree in clinical psychology from Columbia University. Welcome, 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 Pervis.
Thank you so much for having me, Trey. I appreciate it so much.
I'm so excited for this right now. We are dealing with, today we're going to talk about how Black men deal with grief and depression.
Yeah.
And I know your book is all about helping men survive. First, I want you to tell me about the title of your book.
So I called it Survival Mode because I wanted to take men from just surviving in their emotions and trauma to thriving. So I wanted this book to be the bridge to take them from surviving to thriving. So that's why I called it. I just did a play on words of survival mode and made it Survival Mode. So I wanted them to get into the mode of thriving.
I love that. So first I want to talk a little bit about your relationship with your parents, because our parents really are our first blueprint before we learn how to navigate through life on our own and figure out that they didn't really have it all together. So just tell me a little bit about your relationship with your mom first and then your dad.
My mom is a very interesting woman, very, very lovely, very nice, but she's not emotional. She's never been a person who's displayed their emotions other than anger or frustration. But our relationship was good growing up. I think she understood me. I think she allowed me space to be myself, which I do give her that respect. We're great friends now because I understand her and I have empathy for her because I understood her upbringing. Nice. And it took me to understand her upbringing for me to really, really have like a deeper relationship with her. But she's always been kind, gracious. She's a giver, and she's very wise. And I think the gift of coaching that I have is because of her, because I think she's a life coach as well. But she's cool. I've only seen my mother cry I think maybe twice in my life.
Wow.
So so that gives you an indicator of how she is just like Fort Knox. But I think that generation, they had to have that strong threshold because they were dealing with racism. She marched with Dr. King. You know what I mean? She grew up in that era. So they were just trying to survive and try to make it through this life rather than deal with their mental health issues, deal with their emotional issues. So I think that's something that she's still that way.
Right. So how did that emotionally for you as a man already in society, already in life, men are taught, don't cry, be strong, get up.
Yeah.
Okay. How did that weigh on you to only see your mom cry one time? Because women, we cry.
Well, she let me cry. So, you know what I mean? It wasn't like she said, don't cry. It wasn't like she said, be a man, men do this, men do that. It wasn't that. It's just that I never saw her cry. Oh. I never saw her be emotional. So it wasn't that she siphoned off my emotional emoting. It's just that she never emoted.
Oh, okay. Wow, that's interesting. And what about your dad, your relationship with your dad?
I had a good relationship with my father. I mean, obviously he's a very complex person. He's very both and what I mean by that is that I think he's very progressive for that time of us growing up. He always made sure that he told us that he loved us and that he would kiss us on the cheek, or he's very affectionate. He always hugged us up and things like that. And he too let me be emotional to a degree. You know what I mean? He wasn't like, son, you can't cry. He would ask me, why are you crying? So he would ask me as to why I'm expressing or feeling the emotions that I'm feeling. And there would be occasional times, if he was on drugs or something like that, where he would be kind of like that typical toxic masculinity enriched father. But I would say that he was very progressive in comparison to a lot of my other friends' fathers. My father was definitely present and available and very, I had a great relationship with him.
Okay, so you said he was on drugs, except when he was
so
your father had a drug problem.
Yes, he ended up passing away from a heroin overdose. And here's the thing too, my father went to Vietnam, right? And so when he came back, I'm sure he had PTSD. Now that we're older and we can like kind of go over his behavior, really study his behavior, we think he was probably bipolar at the same time. So he was just medicating. So I look at it now as that he was self-medicating. And, because at the time we didn't know, they didn't know what that stuff was. We didn't have a definition for it or a name for it. So he was a functioning addict, which
Wow.
is, I feel like, the worst kind, actually, because you don't know that they're high. You don't know that they're on drugs. You know what I mean?
Right.
But, he was my biggest fan. My father was my biggest fan. So
So we
both
talked,
and.
yeah, today we're talking about grief. So
Yes.
when you lost your father
Hmm.
to being a drug addict, which doesn't weigh any different than him dying from any other disease.
Right.
Your process of grief, because we know that a lot of times as women we could cry, we could do this, we could fall out, and everybody's like okay with it. What is the process of grief of losing a parent first from death, and
Hmm.
then what do you think the process is of losing a parent in a bad relationship?
So, one thing for me personally, or you in general?
You personally.
Okay. So I'll begin with this. So there's a thing called Kubler-Ross model, which takes the stages of grieving, which is the first stage is denial, then it's anger, then it's bargaining, then it's depression, then it's acceptance. So within that, when my father died, I was literally in denial for a long time. And I suppressed I suppressed every emotion I was feeling because I had to go home and help with the funeral. Because I'm originally from Texas, from Dallas, Texas, and I was here in New York when he passed. And so I remember going back home, and it was just like this. It was surreal. And I remember telling my brothers and sister, like, you better not cry.
Mm,
I told them I took on that toxic masculinity identity and saying, like, thinking that you had to be strong because I wanted to appear strong for my family because I some of my cousins, they made fun of me growing up, and so I wanted to be like really really appear to be very very strong. And even to my family, I wanted to appear strong. So I told my brother and sister, don't cry. And I helped my mother through the situation. I even said at the funeral, I don't want nobody crying or laying out because we're not having that,
wow.
because he wasn't doing that when he was alive. Like, just very out of character for me. And
Right.
so, we get through the funeral, shed a couple tears, not too much. Um, so I go back to New York and I'm thinking I'm good. And one day I am on the subway, I'm on the train, and I'm listening to some song. I think it was this song by TLC. I forgot the name of the song, but Table's Turn is called Turntable. And it was just one line in the song, and then literally I just started bawling my eyes out
Wow.
on the New York subway, fell on the floor on that dirty train,
Oh.
yeah, and cried my eyes out. And I think that was the beginning of me understanding that it's important to not suppress emotions. It's important to grieve. It's important to feel what it is you're feeling. And I had to rebrand what I thought being strong was. I had
Mm,
to rebrand my relationship with strength. And so that was the beginning of my journey to the place that I'm at today.
I love
So it
that.
was that experience, yeah.
Wow. Does unresolved grief lead to depression?
Absolutely. It leads to many things. It leads to one thing I always say is that a suppressed emotion is like energy. Energy never dies. That suppressed emotion never dies either. It just transforms. And
Ooh,
so it shows up in so many areas of your life that you didn't think they would show up in. Typically, they show up in our relationships.
right.
And so that, because really the thing that we're suppressing is the hurt and disappointment more than anything, because anger is so easy to harness. You know what I mean? But hurt isn't, especially for men. Hurt that's too much. But anger, we can do something with it. That seems more powerful. And so, yes, to answer your question, yes, you can. You can turn that, it can turn into depression and we don't even know it. And here's the thing too about black men. Black men are the only demographic. So here's why psychology is not an exact science. Black men are the only demographic that display symptoms of depression differently than any other demographic.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is
Especially young men, especially young men.
wow. How does a man, so we have the whole Me Too movement for women,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
So how does a man grieve the loss of his innocence, whether he was too young or taken advantage of? or an older woman, or taken advantage of by an older woman, or from molestation, how do men grieve the loss of their innocence? Because we don't talk about this. We think
Yeah, I mean,
just wants to have sex.
yeah, no, so crazy. I've had so many brothers as of late come to me and tell me that they were molested by their babysitter.
Mm,
And these are brothers I grew up with. I was wondering why. I was like, yo, they highly sexualized it. Like 12 years old, having sex, doing stuff. I didn't realize that they were being molested by their babysitter or somebody in the family. You know what I mean? Um, how do you grieve that? It those stages, right? But I think the thing is to honor our humanity, to say like, yo, I was taken advantage of, to acknowledge that we were taken advantage of, and go through that process of identifying how it's affected our lives, right? Really
right,
saying like, yo, this has led me to this is why I'm here, but also accepting responsibility. So the acceptance component is very difficult for a lot of us because we feel like it is a conceding, it's like a weakness, but acceptance is really powerful because acceptance says, I didn't want this to happen, but I'm still responsible for what happened.
right.
You get what I'm saying? And
Yes,
so acceptance is the place that you actually grow from. When you say, I didn't want this to happen, but it did happen. And so now I can build something. Now
right.
acceptance is the thing that can build a bridge to take you to your next place. When
Wow.
you accept that the trauma has happened, when you accept what is done to your life and say, you know what, I'm still in control because life happens from me. So I'm able to create something now that I own this and I accept this and I acknowledge that this has happened. Now I can really, really go to a new place because now you're aware. You can grieve. Because here's the thing about grieving, right? You don't grieve one time, right? It's a
Right.
process. You know this. And
Yes.
it's like, but each time you go through that process of grieving, right, it gets easier and easier because now you know what to do.
Right.
And so for men that I've worked with who have who've dealt with molestation. I've dealt with molestation.
Wow.
The biggest thing is you do not take that thing on as an identity. You do
Mm,
not take the shame on as an identity. And so that's part of the acceptance. This is what happened to me, but this is not who I am.
wow. Whoa, that was just very, very powerful because a lot of times, like a babysitter molesting a
Hmm.
boy, or an older woman coming on to a younger man, not
Hmm.
necessarily it wasn't consensual, but like
Right.
we talked about earlier in the back end, that my son's brain is not even developed until 29. So a
Yeah.
older woman, say 25, and a boy is 14 years old. Of course, to him, it might feel like a coming of age or whatever. Or maybe
Hmm.
he gets to a certain age and realizes his innocence was taken away from him too soon. And if that grief is not dealt with properly, then it goes into like womanizing. Would you agree to that?
Yeah. And you can become a deviant. So many things that can happen if we don't deal with it. It could be ruining relationships. It could be just simply that he feels empty all the time. You know what I mean? Like it could be simply he deals with low self-esteem. Like every time he sleeps with a woman, that's when he feels validated. So he has to keep sleeping with women to feel validated. You know
Ooh,
what I mean? So it's so many areas and places that we can go within that because here's the thing: we all respond to trauma differently.
right. I love that. And not to talk
Yeah.
about R. Kelly, but a lot
Right.
of people were not happy with the way I responded to R. Kelly because
Yeah.
I believe that my movement in the book that I wrote is Men Hurt Too. It's
Hmm.
anti Men Hurt Too because I believe R. Kelly was molested and
By
didn't
both
deal,
genders. Yeah.
right, and didn't deal with the grief. So
Right.
ungrief, not dealing with grief, like you said, leads to adverse and poor behavior. So this
Yeah.
person dealing with grief from the time he was 6 years old, and
Yeah.
nobody protected him. He never got the help that he needed. So throwing him in jail, I just didn't think was the right thing. I felt like he needed to go into a mental institution maybe to get extensive help. And people were like, oh, this, that, and the other. So, like I said, where is the Me Too movement for men? Why
Because we got some Me Too
I
stories.
think there is no Me Too movement for men
Right.
that helps women deal with the loss of their innocence. It helps them grieve their loss. Do you
Right.
think that there needs to be a Me Too movement for men?
Well, I mean, are we prepared to have that conversation?
Right,
Because
you
I
gotta
look
be, as a man, a black
well,
man.
but well, because that's the thing is like I look at what happened to Terry Crews when he was accosted
Right,
by his agent, and how it was kind of like all this. A lot of people couldn't. Man, that would never happen to me. I would never let that. And it's like, and even with my own Me Too story, I think I wrote a post about one time being felt up by a female celebrity while we taking pictures, and how uncomfortable I felt, and how most men would be like, yo, I would holler. But it was like, but I didn't invite that. And if the roles were reversed,
Right.
you know what I mean? I'd be dead meat. And so for me, I just think that we really need to have a conversation about men being human beings, because I
Yeah.
think a lot of times we don't see men as full total human beings who go through experiences, who have emotions, who don't necessarily respond to things the way that we think a man should. And men, because we don't, we're punishing ourselves, or we're identifying, we're taking on shame, or we're saying we're not a man, we're not this, we're not that, because society doesn't embrace us
Right.
as full human beings. And so yeah, I definitely think we need to have a whole conversation about um, sexual abuse in men.
Right. I think so too. And I
Yeah.
that's the first one of the first lines in my book is men are human beings first, because
Yes.
the doctor says it's a boy, you become a male
Right.
of a human being, and these over the top expectations of what a man should be is placed on you as
Yeah.
soon as you pop out. So
Yes.
I just love this conversation. Let's see. How does a man grieve the loss of his identity in the world? Like, people think that grief is
Mm.
just losing
Yeah.
a loved one, but men grieve the loss of a job, a loss of innocence, a loss of relationship, a loss of money, which is tied to their identity. So are
Right.
there a lot of men grieving in this world based on not knowing who they are?
Yeah, and also too, that's one of the things I teach men. Is like, we men see, the thing, I say this all the time. So women get to be actualized in so many ways other than output, right?
Right?
So you're a life coach, Trey. You're a mother. You're a friend. You're a sister, and you get to be actualized in all those things, and all those things are important to you. But we as men, we don't get to have that experience. We're measured in how much money we make, how we can provide, and typically that's it. What we do for a living, typically, right? Um, the thing is that our identity is based off the wrong thing. Our
Right.
identity needs to be based off of, not to get spiritual, but who God says we are, right? And so yeah, so who God says you are is first and primary, right? But then you have to build your identity as well, and your identity can be based off of output. It has to be based off of just who you are.
Right.
And we don't spend enough time getting to know who we are as men. Our foundation is typically about how many women we smashed, how much money we made, all these other things, rather than I'm a good dude. I love, I have a great personality. I'm a great friend. Like, all those things, understanding who we are, we don't spend enough time knowing who we are,
Right.
because we get so caught up in the culture and the society at large and telling us who we're supposed to be, as opposed to us telling us who we are. We
Wow.
don't even honor ourselves as human beings. And
Oh,
that's the thing, part of my journey, I had to honor myself as a human being.
right. I love that. Listen, do you think trauma not dealt with leads to a lifetime of silent grief?
Absolutely. So one of the things, Chris Burge is an incredible Bible study teacher. He just had this statement. I put it in my book. He says, men scream at a frequency that only they can hear.
Woo! You got the hashtag and tweet that.
Yeah, he said men scream at a frequency that only they can hear. And it was so true, because I was thinking about that period in which my father died. That's when I started to remember that I was molested. That's when I went through this deep depression, and all these memories, all these traumas that I suppressed started to come up, and they wouldn't go away.
Wow.
And so I was screaming, right? And no one could hear it. And so I said, I had this conversation with God. I said, Lord, if you can heal me of this, I will help people to get through this as well. And so I learned to be vulnerable enough to share what was going on and not care what anybody had to say, because it was that pressing on me. I said, I don't give a damn what you think about me. I'm gonna tell you what happened. You know what I mean? Because I needed to get it out, because I couldn't take it, because I would, because the thing is, men implode, then we explode.
Right.
You
Right.
know what I mean?
People don't get that. Yeah, that it's
Yes.
not coming out. It's a pressure cooker, and
Yes.
somebody's going to be the straw that broke the camel's back. So
Exactly.
when men are in relationships, and I never want this to be about love and all that, because we have so many
Yeah.
people on platforms talking about what's the problem, why men don't date, why am I dealing with this, why am I dealing with that? I just want women to hear from men that
Right.
when they're dating, there are things that men have not grieved. So it's
Absolutely.
in your relationship. So I want just a little bit about for women who are with a man right now who are trying to figure all of this out. What
Mm-hmm.
would you tell them? Because every man, I believe, and I'm maybe not every, let's say 90%, we'll do some statistics to look it up. I'll go look it up later.
Right.
90% of men have not dealt with some form of trauma in their life that they're grieving.
Yeah.
How do we and how can we help them in our homes?
Well, I think the biggest thing I think you and I were talking about earlier is understanding that, embracing that men are human beings, right? And so I think it begins there in understanding that there's a small window of opportunity for a man to be vulnerable, and if that window is compromised, it will never be opened up again.
Whoa.
So it's the truth. So allowing a man, giving him space to process and say, listen, whatever it is that you're going through, I literally am here to help you through that. And if he shares that with you and you throw it back up in his face, say in an argument, or say when you're, you know what I mean, when you're angry about something, know that he's never going to be vulnerable with you again. So understand the fragility of men in that space. Like, we're very fragile in that, because it's like we're not taught to deal with that. So
Wow.
understanding, so as a woman, first of all, read this book because it helps you understand how men think. It
Yeah.
helps you understand how we process and how we deal with certain things.
Right.
But just giving a man that space to be human and say, and really let go of what you think a man is supposed to be in that regards, in terms of like the toxic masculinity. A man's supposed to be strong, silent, all this like that. No, if he
Right.
needs to cry, let him cry. If he needs to talk about it, let him talk about it. If he needs to just be by himself, let him be by himself. Give him that space to process.
So I think about the reason why I'm here, and I want everybody to understand that men hurt too, is because I have three sons. I have a 25-year-old, a 20-year-old, and a 10-year-old. And then I remember growing up with my uncles. I have
Mm-hmm.
uncles, my mother's two brothers, who had, well, my mother's one brother had multiple women that came to our house. He was a great guy, a great, 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 great guy.
Right. He was both and.
Yeah, both and. He was
Yeah.
supposed to signify a monkey, all these great stories. He was in
Yeah.
the military, so he came back with these stories. But he had all these women coming in and out of the house. And for us, that became normal because my mother accepted it. But then when I got older and I realized that he lost his mom, they lost their mom at 15.
Mm-hmm.
And my grandfather was a womanizer of
Mm-hmm.
younger women. And God rest his soul, Pop was and what is it, and in both?
Both and.
And they were all both.
Yeah.
And. So I'm starting to understand this now. But the grief that they dealt with when nobody helped them. So I think about my father, who my mom had a kid on. She had a baby with another man. And myself, who I did the same thing to my husband. I was out of the relationship already, but I cheated on him and moved on to somebody else. And it was very traumatic for both of them, my dad and my ex-husband. They didn't deal with the grief, right?
Mm-hmm.
They still haven't, I don't believe. My dad never got married again, and my ex never really moved on to a full relationship. What happens when you don't deal with that grief?
You get stuck in that same space.
Ooh.
They call it complicated grief. When you're not grieving, when you're not moving forward with the grief, or so for instance, if you're not dealing with the emotions, you're not showing any emotions whatsoever, or if you're showing too much emotion, or if you're stuck and you haven't moved in the Kubler-Ross model of grieving, so to speak, they call it complicated grief. And so that's difficult. So there is actually therapy for that, to help you to move through that, or help you to get to a space of where you can function again. So to me, it's kind of like you become like a zombie. You become like a shell of yourself, because at that point the grief probably becomes bitterness, or probably, you know what I mean, it probably turns into bitterness. It probably turns into you just not being who you are anymore.
Wow.
Losing yourself. Yeah.
Right, because I felt some kind of way for years about my dad, who's
Mm-hmm.
in California. And then when I realized, we do the work.
Right.
And I had to do the work before I became a coach. And
Right.
I realized what he dealt with my mom was in the death of a marriage.
Yes.
Death of a relationship.
And it's a death of you in a way.
Right.
It's a death of you in a way. So it's like I tell young men this, I said, the process either forms you or it harms you,
Ooh,
depending upon how you respond to it or react to it. And so, though it was something that wasn't pleasant for your father or pleasant for your ex-husband, they still have a choice in choosing life, right? You can choose life or you can choose to remain where you are.
right.
And but also too, they may not have known that that's an option for them. You know
Right.
what I mean?
Why do you think that a Black man wouldn't know that there's an option for help for him to grieve?
I just think it's just the way that we're brought up. I just think it's the world that we live in. I just, that you don't see that talked about. There's no male TV show like The View. There's no male show like The Real where we talk about our emotions and things like that. So it's like it's not modeled. People think to the level of their exposure. And so if you're not exposed to that type of thing, you typically don't know that that exists.
Well, I always talk about this because I always want to help men. Like
Right,
I want them to just show up for the help.
right,
What can we do? Because we're here for solutions, because Black men
right,
too. What can
right.
we do to get the men to show up? Because we have all these women's empowerment conferences, but my thing is I'm about to launch both books again for simultaneous healing.
Right,
We'll talk on the back end because I want to partner with
right.
people, but how do we get the men to simultaneously heal if they're not willing to accept the help to grieve?
Well, I just think it's the way it's disseminated, right? So one of the things I think the reason why I'm so successful when people ask me like, how are you so successful in working with men, is that I'm very vulnerable about my life experience.
Right,
Even though a lot of men cannot relate to what I've been through, I think they respect the fact that this brother is putting himself out there. Because I never want to paint myself as that I have arrived and I'm not on the journey with you. No, we're on the journey together.
right,
And so for me, I think it's really about how it's disseminated, how it's couched for them to receive it. Because I know for me, it's like when I see certain things, I'm like, I'm not going to that, because it feels so impersonal. It feels like you're listening to people who don't necessarily know who have gone through the process themselves or done the work themselves. I think men, like, we're smart.
right,
Men, people are able to discern what is authentic and what is not. And I think a lot of times, we want to hear from, I'm not thuggish at all,
right,
but for some reason I can connect with a lot of men. You know what I mean? Like, just in general. So it's like, I just think that it's all about how it's designed, and how the wording, the language, for them. I don't know. It's one of those things. It's just kind of like, you got to just throw and see what sticks.
okay,
You know
right.
what I mean?
We always want
Because
to
something,
know, like, my thing is, how can we help? How can I help?
just
A lot of people don't want to help because they just like,
you
man
can
up.
you help by having the heart that you have for men. You help by making yourself available. And it's like, men know, like how you told me, you said men are very honest and vulnerable around you. So you are a safe space. Just continue to be a safe space. I just want people to, women, be a safe space.
Okay, that's
Just
good.
be a
So
safe space.
what is one of the most important points in your book that you would like women to know? Because this right here, Men Hurt Too, this is for men. And I know men are going to listen and say, thank you, this brother, because the last two guests were awesome and they shared like
Yeah,
so
I saw
much.
you had Barry on. That's my boy,
Yeah,
Barry
I was
Cooper.
just,
Yeah,
some of the stuff they said, I was just like, wow, like, come here, let me give you a hug,
yeah,
because you dealt with some trauma and that's your story. What is
yeah,
the one thing you want women to understand from your book
yeah.
about the men in their lives?
So this is something I always share with women, and it is so crazy. So on average, women speak 30,000 words a day, right? On average, men on average speak 10,000 words a day. And so this as a coach, Trey, that your healing is in your words.
Yeah,
So understanding that men have limited words, thus we have limited healing. So if we can create a space where a man can talk more, then we can get to a space of healing within that man. And so understanding, women, y'all speak 30,000 words a day. There's a 20,000 word gap in communication.
right.
So the point is trying to, in finding a way to get a man to share more. trying to get him to use. So for me, I try to teach men how to use descriptive language, how to use sensory language when they're talking, so that women can understand where they're coming from. You know what I mean? So my goal is to teach men how to use more words. And
I love
so
it.
if you as a woman can find a way to get your husband to use more words, maybe ask him like, are you feeling like this? Are you feeling like that? And getting him to expound on it more, that will help in communication.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
One more question because it's
Yes.
9:30. I hate that
It
it's
went by
fast.
so fast. Yeah.
It really always does. Like,
Yeah.
we're okay. You just tuned in. You're tuned in to Coffee with Tea. This is our series, Men Hurt Too, for the month of March. And we're here with life coach Pervis Taylor, who is an amazing life coach. And if you need help as a man, please, he can get you from where you are to where you want to be. And it's not a fast process because
No.
grief, depression, and healing is a process. So again, I just want you to share the stages of grief and
Okay.
to just give men just one tidbit or one nugget that they can take with them right now.
So this Kubler-Ross model of grief, the first stage is denial, where you're like, that ain't happened, that ain't happened, this is not real. Then the next one is anger, where you're like angry at the person. And then it's bargaining, which is like, what if I would have done this? What if I would have done that? Right. And then it's the depression where it just kind of hits you, that everything is happening and you're going through that whole process. And the last part is acceptance, where you accept the situation and and understanding that acceptance doesn't mean that you condone what happened,
Right.
but it means that you acknowledge that it did happen. So that's the stages of grief. Oh my gosh, one nugget I would leave from men. Um, so many things went through my mind. I would say this: you are entitled to honor your humanity. You owe it to yourself to honor your humanity. And what I mean by that is, if you are hurting, if you are screaming inside, if you are dealing with anxiety, if you're dealing with so much, if you're dealing with grief and all the gamut of things that we deal with as human beings, you have the right to be whole. You have the right, and wholeness is possible for you, but you have to begin the process. You have to stick to the process. You have to be tough in that. You got to
Yes.
engage in your grit. You know
Yes.
what I mean? You got to be gritty with it. And so that's the thing. So the thing is with us as Black people, we have a lot of grit. So we're able to endure a lot of things and work through things, but then we want to get to a space of agency where we can advocate for ourselves. So for a man to advocate for himself is a place that we ultimately want to get men to. We want to advocate for our mental health. We want to advocate for how we feel. So I want you to know as men that wholeness is possible.
Yes.
Wholeness is possible for you, but you have to engage in the process.
Thank you so much, Purvis. Listen, we got to do this again because I still have
Yes.
52 questions sheet that I need. I told you this was going to be therapeutic for me as well as those who are
Yes.
listening because like I said, I deal with a lot of men. I have 3 sons. Most of the time I have male energy around me and I just
Right.
feel safe and be able to understand that I get it. I'm
Yeah.
not mad at you because of what one man did. And a lot of us carry
Right.
that as Black women. We're so angry at the 3 relationships that we had, which for us is like, I've had 3 failed relationships with a Black man. 3 relationships is not a lot. Like there's millions
Right.
of men and Black men in the world who are good men. You
Right.
happen to come across 3 men. So I want women to let go of that and understand that,
Yeah.
first of all, men hurt too. They need healing.
Yes.
Second of all, don't base your experience on or your life on 3 experiences you had with 3 men.
Right.
Please tell us where we can find you and how to get your book and all that good
Um,
stuff.
all that good stuff. So the book is Survival Mode. You can get it off survivalmode.com. You can follow me on Instagram at Pervis Taylor, PervisTaylor, and Pervis Taylor on Facebook. And I just want to tell you, Trey, thank you so much for creating this space for men. I think that's part of the healing because I always tell women, as I said, women's issues are men's issues and men's issues are women's issues. That's how we
Yes,
heal.
that's it. Simultaneous healing. Because if all of these women
Simultaneous.
out there healing and none of the
Right.
men are healing, that's why we're running into the same problem. Because you're
Exactly.
healing, running into a man who hasn't dealt with his grief and his trauma and he's depressed and you're
Yeah.
feeling like he's doing something to you, which he's
Right.
not. He just not
Right.
has dealt with himself, so he's not whole. So again, you're coming to a place again as a woman of healing from an experience that you're having with a man who just hasn't had the help that he needs, because again,
Exactly.
men hurt too. Thank you guys so much
Exactly.
for tuning into Coffee with Tea. This is the Men Hurt 2 series. We'll be back here. I'll be back here tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time for Coffee with Tea, my regular show. I have to thank and honor my guest, Dr. Pervis Taylor. I love you so much because
I
you
love you too.
please follow him. I'm simply, please, please, please follow him. Wait, there's one more thing I just got to say.
Yes.
There was a thing you put on Facebook, you shared about one of your students who said he went through molestation and he was trying to scrub his skin off. I thought that was so deep. They have to stay for like 2 more seconds so you can talk.
2 more seconds for this. So yeah, he was sharing with us that he was molested like for years by a man. And he said he was sharing with us, he was like, Pervis, I take 45-minute showers still to this day where I'm like, I feel like I'm scrubbing. And I said to him, I said, you got to stop identifying with the molestation. That's something that happened to you. That's not who you are. And he started crying. And the next week, we were talking about grief. Obviously, in that session, we were talking about grief and how you have to grieve that process and get to a place of acceptance. And he said, Pervis, he said, for a week, a consistent week, I've been showering for 15 minutes. And he said, the first time in my life, I looked in the mirror and I didn't look at myself with disgust. I said, yes, because you are not what happened to you. You are who you decide you want to be, who God says you are. And so that was very powerful for me, because I think so many of us, women and men in general, we identify with the trauma of our lives. We take it on as an identity. And that's one of the biggest mistakes we can ever make. That's something that happened to us, but it's not who we are.
I just had to share that because that's what it's all about. That was about the process and coming out healed. He's not healed, but he is healing. Because
he's in the process.
Yes, it went from 45 minutes to 15 minutes. And I just want people to see that there are results when you actually get the help. There's a
and also when you apply.
Right. He actually stopped scrubbing his skin for 45 minutes and in the shower for 15. That is just powerful. And I want men to know that there is healing and wholeness for you. All you have to do is ask for the help in private. We're not trying to make you go to a big old conference. We just trying to reach out to @Pervis Taylor, and you can be anonymous. Nobody's trying to out you. Nobody's trying to make you feel small, insignificant, weak, or any of those things. We just want you to be whole. So again, Pervis, thank you so much. And I will talk to you soon. Thank you guys for tuning in to Coffee with Tea. Remember what I tell you at the end of all my broadcasts. You deserve the best. Yes, I'm talking to you. You deserve the best. Now go get it. Peace and blessings. And remember Psalm 147:3. He heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds. Psalm 147:3. He heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds. I'll see you guys tomorrow, 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time for Coffee with Tea. And that's me. Peace.